Thank you, Donald, and good evening, everybody. Well, it was on this programme last night. We brought you the breaking news. There'd been a shooting in Lower Manhattan, and, of course, as the evening went on, we found out more of the truth about that story. And the man, of course, accused of killing 8 people by driving a truck down a cycle lane was, we now believe, inspired by ISIS. That is because the police found notes in the car that linked him to Islamic State. The suspect, Saifullo Saipov, is a 29-year-old Uzbek immigrant. He was shot by the police and injured, and he's currently in hospital and under arrest. Unsurprisingly, President Trump has had quite a few things to say about this, including this.
We're so politically correct that we're afraid to do anything. And that's not only our country, that's other countries too, that are having very similar problems. And we have to get tough, we have to get smart, we have to do what's right to protect our citizens.
We have to get tough, we have to get smart, we have to do what we can to protect our citizens. That is exactly the response you would have expected from Donald Trump, and indeed, in many ways, that is the ticket, the manifesto upon which he was elected. And you remember, right back to the early days of this presidency, back to the end of January this year, he tried to bring in a travel ban for several countries. He's looked for much, much tougher vetting, and he's put together a whole mass of legislation. And one of the areas that legislation that will go before Congress before too long, one of the areas that it covers is the route by which this 29-year-old Uzbek got into America. It is the Diversity Immigrant Visa Program, and it works this way. 50,000 individuals every year through a lottery, with percentages allocated to each different country, come into the USA. The Uzbeks get 5% of that quota. Clearly, there are some today saying, well, look, there isn't much we can do to stop this kind of thing. But the president is insistent. He wants Congress to put through a series of measures, including completely ending the Diversity Immigrant Visa Program. I have to ask you, and we've talked about this subject before, but does this attack in New York prove that Trump was right all along to pursue his immigration crackdown? If you think, no, his rhetoric is over the top, it's too much, it's divisive and dangerous, then call me on 0345 6060 973. Perhaps you think this proves him totally right, in which case you can text to 84850. Maybe you think actually the travel ban needs to be extended to more countries, given that Uzbekistan was not part of the original 7, now 8 countries. And in that case, you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, you can watch me on Facebook and comment there too. Was Trump right to pursue an immigration crackdown all along? Does this attack last night prove that he was right to try to do this? And Daniel from Enfield is my first caller of the evening. Hello, Daniel.
Good evening. Good evening, Nigel. I think he's got to do something. I mean, you can only light so many candles, and that's not really going to sort a problem like ISIS out. I think, but the problem we have is we're being kind of lied to, because I feel that Saudi Arabia has a big part to play in this, but like us and America, we're too busy selling them arms. So I do think we're like it's kind of like a token effort. It's like, look, I'm doing something, but he's not really doing anything. I mean, meanwhile, over here, I don't know if you've spoken about Operation Constrain. I mean, what the government are looking to do next year is basically to try to sort out jihadis and returning jihadis, is put them at the top of lists for
housing
council.
Yeah, isn't that great? Yeah, wonderful, isn't it? Well, actually, Daniel, given that you've said that, let's just pick up on what Trump has tweeted on this issue, because he said on Twitter late last night, he said, "We must not allow ISIS to return or enter our country after defeating them in the Middle East and elsewhere. Enough." So he's making it very clear he wants no returning jihadi fighters. And Daniel, this theme we talked about last week, and I've certainly I've had very strong views on this for years. And Trump himself said the UK has allowed over 400 returning jihadis. And Daniel, I find it astonishing that when Rory Stewart, a junior minister at the Foreign Office, says we should kill these people using drone strikes when they're in Syria, but if they turn up the next day at Heathrow, that's absolutely fine and dandy. I can't work it out for the life of me. So do you think, Daniel, would you would you feel more confident living in the United Kingdom with our approach to this, or America with Trump's approach to it?
What, trying to talk them out of being terrorists? That's never going to work, is it? Come on. I mean, I'm starting to honestly think, I'll be honest with you, I'm starting to honestly think that...
They were naive, Daniel. Daniel, you're going too far, Daniel. Now, Max Hill, QC, who's a government advisor on this, says that most of the people that went were naive and we should be nice to them. What's the matter with you, Daniel?
Yeah, we should be. I'm starting to wonder, because if they really do implement this idea, it makes me start to think that we're living under some sort of rogue state, because you don't let the enemy in. I mean, seriously, imagine during World War II, would we have invited the Nazis over here during their invasion of Europe? Would have gone, yeah, come over. We'll give you a house as well. I mean, come on.
Daniel, I'm not sure it's a perfect comparison, but I do understand the point you're making. Daniel, perfectly clear where you stand. Dr. Ralph says to me by text, Nigel, 50,000 Visa lottery winners every single year since the 1990s. One does something foolish and abhorrent, and you start your lies, by Dr. Ralph. You know, it's all well and good, Dr. Ralph, disagreeing with me. I'm very happy for you to disagree with me. But please, pick up the phone, 0345 6060 973. I really think that when we reduce the argument to calling each other liars, we're probably in quite a bad place with this. I have endeavoured to tell no lies about this, and don't believe I have. I do get your point. I had a taxi driver the other day in DC. I said, where are you from? He mentioned Ethiopia. I said, how'd you get to America? He said, I got here on the lottery. I'm so happy. You know, he said, compared to my brothers and sisters back at home, I've got a fantastic life here in DC. He was chatty, he was decent, he was very nice. He even knew the way. And, you know, yeah, of course, Dr. Ralph, some great people have gone to America through this programme. But, you know, Trump, as the leader of that nation, has a job, and his job as he sees it is to make American cities safer than right now European cities are. And I have to say, Dr. Ralph, I would feel far more secure living with Trump as my leader than I would with Angela Merkel as my leader. Mamadou is calling me from New Cross. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel. First time caller, so I'm a bit nervous.
Well, welcome to the show. Don't be nervous. Just imagine we're having a chat over a cup of tea and tell me what you think.
Okay, basically, you're saying that Donald Trump, you should agree what Donald Trump is doing, banning Muslims coming from Muslim countries.
Well, hang on. Let's just be clear about this. Let's just be absolutely clear about this. Trump is not engaged in a religious war against Islam. Far from it, Mamadou. Remember, his first overseas visit as president, he went to Saudi Arabia, he spoke to some of the biggest and most powerful Muslim leaders in the world and said, I want to work with you to drive out of your places of worship the bad people who are causing this trouble. So he is not obsessively anti-Muslim or anti-Islam. He's just against the bad guys.
Wow. My point is, Nigel, what Donald Trump should do first is to ban those gangs in America, because I was listening Ian today. He said that from 2011, this is the first terror attack in New York. But if you could just tell me how many people being killed in America, in New York, exactly for gangs, because of guns.
Mamadou, I mean, there are tens of thousands of people every year in America injured or killed through guns. It is a massive problem in that country, and hey, we saw that in Las Vegas not that long ago. And I would agree with you, and I've always thought the idea that you can buy an automatic repeating assault rifle sort of over the counter effectively was pretty ridiculous. The problem, I guess the real problem America now has with guns is even if it did change its gun policy, there are already tens of millions of these weapons out there in private hands already. So you're quite right to say there is a big problem with deaths in America through guns. I wouldn't disagree with that for one moment. But on the specifics of extreme Islamic terrorism, you know, extreme vetting, being careful about who's led into the country must make sense. And I put this to you, and all you Trump haters listening right now, the so-called Muslim ban was based on the list that Barack Obama's administration had drawn up. All Trump did was literally copy and paste the list that Obama's regime had said posed a danger. So, Mamadou, are you reassured, in a sense, when I say that he's not against all Muslims?
I'm not, because people like using this Islamic terrorists. There's nothing to do with Islam on terrorists. You know what I'm saying? I'm myself Muslim.
Yep.
My brother lives in America. Imagine if my brother was there. He could have been killed as well at the same time.
Oh.
In Islam, he said whoever killed one person is as you killed the whole world. And whoever saved one person is, as you said, save the whole humanity in the world. So there's nothing to do with Islam. There's just people trying to work, like doing their business and not killing people.
Well, Mamadou, it's true. It's true that more Muslims have been killed by Islamic terrorism than any other group. And it's happening all the time with suicide bombs and terrible things that we've seen in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. The problem is, Mamadou, when you say to me it's nothing to do with Islam, the difficulty is that, this Saipov, 29-year-old Uzbek, as he came out of that vehicle yesterday, was chanting Islamic slogans, and the people that do it, even though you reject it as part of your doctrine, the people that do it believe they're doing it in the name of Islam. Mamadou, great call. Thank you very, very much indeed. It is the 1st of November. This time of the year, you start to see poppies being worn in people's lapels and on their hats, and there are 150,000 poppy sellers out there in this country. And here's the thing. The old £1 coin is no longer legal tender, and I bet you found some in an old overcoat, in a drawer, stuffed down the back of the sofa, maybe in the car. You put them aside to pay for parking fees. Those old £1 coins are no longer legal tender, but the 150,000 poppy sellers who are out there on behalf of the Royal British Legion, who do fantastic work for veterans and their families, they can take those old £1 coins and exchange them and get full face value. So at absolutely no cost to you, and to help their campaign, and they're aiming to raise nearly £50 million this year with their campaign, please give them your old £1 coins. I have, and I encourage you to do the same thing as well. So Trump clearly saying that the legislation that I've wanted to put in place would make America a safer place. And I do understand when people say, look, there are more people being killed by guns. Other comments I get on Twitter, there are many more killings in the US that are not by Muslims and or immigrants. The US lives would be safer if Trump tackled those. That's what Jan says to me on Twitter. Yeah, and Trump has said, Chicago, the death rate, all of this is unacceptable. Yes, you're quite right. There are all sorts of problems with crime in America. But is it acceptable? Is it right in America that the diversity immigrant visa program based on a lottery has led to this? Michael says to me, he says, it's easy to say only one, but what's the right number of deaths? What's an acceptable price to pay for relaxed immigration policies? So clearly two big sides to this argument. My next caller on this is Ackwell, who's calling from Barking. Good evening.
Hi, good evening, Nigel. Yeah, I was going to say, this particular policy he's trying to overturn, this is what makes America great. It's like in a policy like this, a lottery system, whereas people from anywhere from the world could come into America and make their life, so much into a bettering their life. And there are some great people who came into America through this system, and it's like, they have contributed to America. And it's like, Trump is like all for making America great again, and he's like, he found the opportunity to, finally, put his foot down on this particular policy, and it's like, call it a day. And it's like, it's not fair. It's like, the way he's going on about things now, he's so angered. Even when people died, yes, there are people dying in Mogadishu. We live in a world where it's like an incident like this could happen anytime, anywhere, and people would die. And it's like that's the world we have. We live in, and unfortunately, the way we are fighting the war, and it's like the policies we are pursuing, this is the way we have to live now. It's like people are going to die. It's like all of a sudden. It could happen anywhere.
Well, I mean, two things to say to that. I mean, firstly, America, the melting pot. Trump has changed policy, but to be fair, Obama was thinking about how to change policy beforehand. So Trump has said that he wants to prioritise a merit-based immigration system, and he wants people who have got usage of the English language and want to integrate into American culture. Now, that is not an easy thing to achieve, but that is where he's trying to take US immigration policy. And your point about terrorism being present all over the world. I know Trump was elected on America first, but the last thing he's done is to say to hell with the rest of the world, because yesterday the Trump administration pledged $60 million to stop the next reservoir of jihadi terrorists. I'm talking about countries like Nigeria, countries like Chad, those parts of West Africa where vile organisations like Boko Haram have been growing. And so they've been putting money in. And this is part of what Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State, has been doing. And, Mali's Foreign Minister, Mr. Diop, said US support was critical. So to be fair, Ackwell, he wants to make America safer by putting very strict conditions on who can come into the country. But would you agree with me that it's a very good thing that he's helping these West African countries deal with the scourge too?
Reaching out to it's like anywhere in the world and helping other people fight this terrorism it's a good thing.
Yes.
But to be fair, it's like he's blowing his own trumpet for his own followers. It's like people who would be cheering him up, and it's thanking him for pursuing this. Why couldn't he be this angered when this gunman killed quite a few people in this concert? There was
hundreds of people. Yeah,
and that particular he could have been angered in similar way, and stop gun crimes, and people dying from gun crimes and guns. He could have been similarly angered. Why couldn't he be similarly angered on those sort of issues?
Well,
this particular issue, he's blowing his own trumpet.
Well, this is politics, Ackwell, and he was elected on this ticket. He was elected warning we don't want our cities to become like European cities, and what happened in New York yesterday made them look a little bit like that. Ackwell, I don't for one moment discount what you say about Las Vegas and other terrible things that are happening in American cities. Maybe he feels there's nothing he can do about that. And even if gun laws changed, there are still, I think, over 100 million guns in circulation in America today. Ackwell, I thank you very much for your call. What Trump said makes complete sense. It's the correct approach. Why is it now the media can't see this and always automatically go into liberal mode, says Chris. I've no idea if Trump's responses to terror can work, but the fact he's prepared to act to protect his people is healthy. The British response to terror feels awfully weak in comparison, says Michael by text. And Michael, I have to say, I agree with you. Anna is calling from Croydon. She's a new caller to the programme. Welcome. Good evening, Anna.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Farage. Well, first off, I'm absolutely terrified and horrified to say I actually agree with Mr. Trump. I think on this occasion he's got it right. You
say that because you sort of generally don't like his demeanour, or?
I say that because I don't know too much probably to go to speak about at the moment.
All right.
I'll give you my background. I'm an ex-Soviet Union citizen. My parents lived and worked in Uzbekistan, and it is a lovely and beautiful country. Now, I'm Russian myself, ethnic Russian.
Yeah.
So are my parents. However, since the falling apart of the Soviet Union, what has gone on in that country is absolutely atrocious. When the Soviet Union fell apart, the country had other financial influence coming in from Saudi Arabia. Massive funds have gone in, and the radicalization of just ordinary, simple folk has been phenomenal.
And do you, Anna, you're the second caller tonight that has mentioned Saudi Arabia. You are convinced, are you, that radicalization has been paid for with Saudi money?
I'm not just convinced, I know for a fact it has. I know many people who have traveled to US, Australia, England, immigrants who have immigrated, perfectly wonderful people, but even they are horrified with what is going on in their homeland. Now, I myself, in 95, was part of a project which was sponsored by the US Congress, which was to cherry-pick children from across the Soviet Union, take them to the US, teach them Western values, and then send them back to their countries and spread the, the good word of democracy, whatever you want to call it. However, some take it on, some do not. This, what appears to be charity, sometimes backfires. And I fear on this occasion, that's exactly what's happening. And sometimes charity is appropriate, sometimes it is not.
Anna, you very, very, very well made points. Can I ask you one quick question as a Russian passport holder? How do you feel when you're being assailed now by the media, both in America and now the United Kingdom, to be told that somehow it's the Russians that caused Brexit and Trump to get elected? How does that make you feel?
I used to laugh. I actually genuinely sometimes fear to speak and tell people that I am Russian now.
Because you could be part of the conspiracy, Anna, couldn't you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Apparently I'm a paid Putin bot that promotes all the wrong things. But hey, I wish.
Anna, listen, I thank you very much for your call. I think Anna's onto something, and Howard on Facebook is getting there too. He says, as long as there is no overreaction, Trump can gain support for his efforts to reduce future risk. Anna saying, I hate to say this, but I think Trump's right. Howard pointing out, if Trump handles this correctly, he will get support for his measures. And folks, that is my big takeout from what will come out of this. I think a lot of fair-minded, middle-of-the-road, not particularly political Americans who maybe find Trump just a little bit too much, a little bit over the top, are going to say, do you know what? Actually, he's right. That's my view. Sam in Beaconsfield, another new caller. What's your view?
Good evening, Nigel. My view is I'm actually not in agreement with Mr. Trump.
Okay.
And I'm not in agreement because I believe that the sort of terrorist problem that we're dealing with is not a national problem, it's an ideological problem. I mean, look, one death is too much, an injury is way too much, fear is too much. We should not have these in our society, so whoever does this is absolutely wrong. But the point is, when you look at the history of these events, there have been Egyptians, there have been Tunisians, there have been Saudi Arabians, there have been Lebanese, and all sorts of different nationalities. What we're facing is an ideological problem, not a national problem. I think if you want to deal with a problem like this, you need to do it through empowerment of communities, you need to do it through increase of education, you need to do it through foreign policy. I'm actually a citizen, Nigel, of one of the countries that Mr. Trump has banned.
Right.
I'm half British, half Iranian.
Okay.
I cannot travel to the United States now, having been there many, many times. I've in fact even gone to an American school, but I can't travel to the United States.
No, I mean, Sam, the trouble with these policies, of course, is that they will be unfair to good people, and I've always conceded that right from the start of this year. But, Sam, time is a bit short, but I get your point that we're dealing with an ideological global problem. But even within that context, isn't it right that an elected national leader should do his or her best to make their own people safer?
Well, every elected national leader should do that.
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, that's all I'm saying, Sam, and we can disagree, but that's the point he would make. Sam, I thank you. So, is Trump right to say, look, what happened in New York yesterday justifies the ticket upon which I was elected and my desire to try to make America safer by being really strict about who comes in through the front door? Well, I've always thought that actually Trump was right. It doesn't mean it will solve all the problems in America. And we've talked tonight about guns and gang crime in Chicago and all the rest of it. There are many, many other problems there too. But I think he's on the right track. And I genuinely think that, sensible, middle-of-the-road Americans are going to start to warm to the concept of Trump's policies. Today, in the House of Commons, in fact, the House of Lords, actually, David Davis was in committee and was talking about what a no deal might look like. This was David Davis earlier on today.
In terms of what does no deal consist of? Well, firstly, I think no deal is improbable. But if we end up with no deal, in my mind that tends to mean no free trade deal and no customs arrangement to go with it. That's the primary thing you lose. What I don't think is we'll end up with a circumstance where there is no agreement over a number of fairly fundamental issues. I don't know, take aviation for one. I think whatever happens, we will have some sort of basic deal. So my view of no deal is a basic deal without the bits we really want.
So that was David Davis talking about what a no deal looks like, and actually saying that even if we don't get a formal deal on customs union and trade, there will actually be grown-up relationships between industries such as aviation, and that the world will continue to function, which I'm sure must be right, because it's in the interest of everybody to do that. Now, that is about a no deal, but the arguments over the Brexit campaign continue to rumble. We've had weeks, months now of the Americans, the Democrats and much of the media saying that Trump colluded with the Russians. Well, I'm sorry to say this has all now come across to this side of the pond. And Ben Bradshaw, the Labour MP for Exeter, has been leading this charge. And this was Ben Bradshaw in Prime Minister's Questions earlier on today.
With today's news that the Electoral Commission is investigating Arron Banks, the main financial backer of Brexit, along with the significant British connections being uncovered by the American Justice Department Special Counsel Robert Mueller investigating Russian interference in the US presidential election, will she assure me that the UK government and all its agencies are cooperating fully with the Mueller investigation, or will do so if asked?
So that was Ben Bradshaw. He's been pushing this line for some time. The Leave.eu organisation, headed up by Arron Banks, is now being investigated, I think again, by the Electoral Commission, and they're going to be investigating whether they took Russian money. Mr Banks's response has been in writing, and he said that the allegations of Brexit being funded by the Russians and propagated by Ben Bradshaw were complete. Well, the word begins with B and ends in S, but it's too early for me to use it. My sole involvement with the Russians was a boozy 6-hour lunch with the ambassador, where we drank the place dry. They have cracking vodka and brandy. Turning to the investigation, we believe that a judge-led inquiry reporting to Parliament that investigates the main campaign groups, Vote Leave, Remain and Leave.eu, would be the best way to clear this nonsense up once and for all. The Remain Electoral Commission isn't up to the job and consists of political placemen from all the main parties. Well, given that I was part of that Leave.eu campaign, I think for the moment I'll make no comment, but report that as quite a big news story today, and one I sense that is not going to go away in a hurry. Now, breaking news, dramatic breaking news, Defence Secretary Sir Michael Fallon has resigned following allegations of past behaviour. There was a front page story on the Sun newspaper yesterday reporting that with a female broadcaster that he might have touched her knee once or twice or thrice during the course of a dinner, and that she told him she'd punch him in the face if he did it again. Other than that, I don't know anything. That's the one thing I know. There must be more to it than that. But anyway, that's the news. Dramatic news. Defence Secretary Sir Michael Fallon has resigned. And suddenly, those that have said that this crisis about allegations of sexual impropriety could turn out for Parliament to be even worse than the expenses scandal of a few years ago, well, it begins to look like they may be right. Back to Trump for the moment. Was he right to say there should be a big cut down on immigration? Did those attacks in New York yesterday justify the things that he'd said, or is it still an over-the-top and unfair reaction? Trump's correct. What's wrong with that, says Joe in London. Trump calls it the way it is. The snowflakes don't like the truth, says John. Lots of opinions here. Charlotte, from the Forest of Dean, what's your view?
Good evening, Nigel. Well, my view is that Trump is right
I think he was right to put the immigration ban and extend it, even though he's had a terrible time of it, trying to get anyone to actually support him with that. And I also believe that now he's trying to get the immigration ban in, he should start looking at the homegrown jihadis, which we have in this country as well, but we're not doing anything about. And I think that if he gets a handle on the immigration side and does it, as you say, tactfully, then I have a feeling that if he does the same with the internal jihadi problem, the homegrown jihadi problem, I think he will have much more support.
Yes, I mean, what he's doing, Charlotte, is he's actually got a piece of legislation that was put together in August. It's called the RAISE Act, and it contains a whole mass of measures, including this diversity lottery. So this is going to be going before Congress and then the Senate before very long. I suspect, Charlotte, his chances of getting this legislation through Capitol Hill are much greater now than they were this time yesterday. Charlotte, I thank you. So I said a moment ago there was this bombshell news that Defence Secretary Sir Michael Fallon had resigned following allegations of past behaviour. Joining me now is Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor. Theo, this is an absolute bolt from the blue, isn't it?
Significant news, yes. Sir Michael Fallon, the Defence Secretary, has resigned as a result of past behaviour and said that his standards had fallen short. This coming from a statement from Downing Street. To give you the background, Nigel, Julia Hartley-Brewer, the broadcaster, had told a story that Sir Michael, when he was a backbencher about 15 years ago, had touched her knee at a dinner. She had told him where to go and said she would punch him in the face if he did it again. And of course, as a result of the Harvey Weinstein sex scandal that's of course crossed over and engulfed Westminster, a list of around 40 MPs, including cabinet ministers, including Sir Michael, was circulated and then ended up on the front page. This particular story ended up on the front page of a national newspaper. What was interesting initially about Sir Michael's difficulty, if you like, was that the Prime Minister had not referred him to the Cabinet Office for investigation, whereas the Trade Secretary, Mark Garnier, had been referred over allegations that he'd used a slur against a secretary and also asked her to buy sex toys at a shop in Soho. So it looked as if Sir Michael had escaped an investigation. The Prime Minister's spokesman had said he was right to apologise, but as I said, not referred him for investigation. But now he has stepped down from his role as Defence Secretary.
But Theo, there is no comparison between Harvey Weinstein, who serially, tried to put young women on their way up in the industry in a very difficult, embarrassing position, and has even been accused of serious sexual assault. This is something that happened 15 years ago between Sir Michael Fallon and Julia Hartley-Brewer, and yes, of course, it was inappropriate that he touched her knee twice. She told him not to repeat. He didn't. Perhaps I'm missing something, but I find it difficult to believe that just on the evidence of that, he's resigned as Defence Secretary.
Well, I wouldn't want to speculate any further. Suffice to say that the translation from the Harvey Weinstein scandal over to Westminster has come about as a result of this list of around 40 MPs, some of which has been described as libellous, others well-known incidents, and other cases on that list actually perfectly consensual affairs that have taken place in Westminster,
which is frankly irrelevant, isn't it, Theo?
But the problem, of course, is that all of this everything has been conflated into one, if you like, story about the standards within Westminster and what happens in Westminster and what's acceptable within Westminster when it comes to the treatment of staff. And Theresa May, of course, has also written to all the party leaders today calling for a meeting next Monday to look at introducing an overarching system in Parliament, which would provide somewhere for staff of MPs to go if they felt that they'd been harassed or subject to any kind of abuse. This is the most high-profile casualty.
This, Theo, on a day when the Prime Minister herself was accused in Prime Minister's Questions of being repeatedly warned about some of this behaviour and frankly ignoring it.
Yes, and of course I'd also refer you back to a comment made by her former Director of Communications, Katie Perrier, who said on the BBC on Monday morning that it was known that the whips withheld information from the Prime Minister that could be used against MPs if they stepped out of line and threatened to rebel on particular pieces of legislation. The problem, and you know this well from your time in politics, Nigel, is that these cases have a currency in Westminster to certain people who work in the whip's office, who want to make sure that various MPs who might be tempted to...
Keeping them in line, isn't it?
Yeah,
yes.
exactly.
Yes,
who might be tempted to rebel, actually stay in line. And especially this is especially crucial when you think back to the coalition, when you think back to the slender majority of around 15 that David Cameron had, and of course the Tories don't have an overall majority now. Votes are scarce and they're hard to come by, and it can be very, very difficult for the whips to maintain order. And this is one method that has been used historically to do so.
Yes, it's a form of blackmail, and it's been well known in politics for a very long time. Theo, I was speculating a moment ago, does this begin to feel to you like something that could become bigger than the expenses scandal?
Well, I said on Monday it had that sort of feeling that it could become as big as the expenses scandal, simply because it was starting to feel like a feeding frenzy in Westminster, in the way it was being approached and the way that names were being drawn in so quickly. Sir Michael is obviously the most high-profile casualty so far, but of course Damien Green, the deputy to the Prime Minister, has been forced to, has strenuously denied behaving inappropriately and is called in the lawyers, so he's another high-profile name. And then of course there are others implicated as well.
And a big list of 40 names. Theo Usherwood, thank you very much indeed. For those just joining us, Defence Secretary Sir Michael Fallon has resigned following allegations about his past behaviour. So Defence Secretary Sir Michael Fallon has resigned over allegations about his past behaviour. The one story that we do know is that broadcaster Julia Hartley-Brewer was sitting next to him 15 years ago to dinner. He touched her knee once. He touched her knee again. She said, and I know her, as she would, "I'll punch you if you do that again." He desisted. And yet, is it just that? Is that really the reason? Well, he's written a letter to the Prime Minister which says a number of allegations have surfaced about MPs in recent days, including some about my previous conduct. Many of these have been false, but I accept that in the past I've fallen below the high standards that we require of the armed forces, and that I must have the honour to represent. I have reflected on my position, and I'm therefore resigning as Defence Secretary. It's been a privilege to have led Defence over the past 3.5 years. We are close to defeating Daesh terrorism in Iraq and Syria. We have taken on a leadership role in NATO, etc., etc. Doesn't say any more than that, just says simply that he's fallen below the right standards. And the reply that has come back from Theresa May: "Dear Michael, thank you for your letter of this evening. I appreciate the characteristically serious manner in which you have considered your position and the particular example you wish to set servicemen and women and others. You should take pride in the way that we've risen to the challenge of fighting Daesh, etc., etc." Well, this is totally extraordinary. I'm sorry, I just don't believe that he's resigned as Defence Secretary because he touched Julia Hartley-Brewer's knee twice. I just don't believe it. Perhaps I'm wrong. Joining me is Andrew Pearce, consultant editor of the Daily Mail, and of course LBC presenter, does a show when I'm not here on Friday evenings. What a good listen it is. Andrew, hello.
How are you, Nigel?
Well, I'm literally astonished that he could have resigned. Andrew, tell me I'm wrong. It must be more than this.
There is more than that. We're getting we don't know yet, but I think there is evidence of possibly relationships with people outside of his marriage. It is not because of Julia Hartley-Brewer. The dossier, which we've all seen, doesn't contain the details, but there's been a lot of innuendo flying around about Michael Fallon, I have to tell you, in the last few days, and he's fallen on his sword. I suspect it will come out in a matter of days. and it's very sad because I think he's a very good man. He's a very solid man. He's a proper Tory, if you're a Tory, and it's a big blow to Mrs. May.
I mean, Andrew, surely there's a very big difference between sexual assault, abuse of position, and somebody behaving, if what you say, if the rumours are right, but in consensual relationships. Surely there's a world of difference here.
Yeah, don't forget he's a married man with children, and he's also had to go through intensive security vetting for his job.
Yeah.
And I suspect, if I'm right about this sort of relationship that may have caused his downfall, it would be one which probably would not have got him through that vetting. I can't be clear, so I'm not going to spell out what I think.
No, okay.
Maybe going down the route, maybe thinking along the lines I'm thinking.
Right, okay. Andrew, if we move on from that, I mean, from the start of this week, I've been really worried that consensual relationships, small-time, mildly inappropriate behaviour was beginning to sort of dominate what may be a debate about something very much more serious. And yesterday we had, a rape allegation made within the Labour Party that effectively was covered up. And that's been my worry, is this will get trivialised and sensationalised, and we won't get to the really serious, bad stuff. You've been through this. You saw the expenses scandal all the way through. What comparisons do you draw at this stage with that saga?
Well, initially, very few, because having seen the dossier, I thought most of it is third-hand, it's hearsay, it's a lot of people like Amber Rudd was in there, the Home Secretary, for having a relationship with a Tory MP called Kwasi Kwarteng.
I mean, so what?
Both of them are single.
Yeah.
Neither of them are married.
Yeah.
And there were other MPs who were in relationships with researchers, that's fine, who cares? Even if they were potentially married, maybe, and they were cheating on the wives, is that the end of the world? So I didn't think this was going to be anything like on the scale of the expenses scandal, because remember, 3 MPs went to prison, and about 5 members of the House of Lords went to prison for stealing large amounts of public money, and they deservedly went to prison. And the whole scandal of the House of Lords meant to a major change in the way MPs are paid their expenses. Now, we've seen a serious allegation of rape within the Labour Party, which wasn't dealt with properly, and we've now seen a very senior cabinet minister resigning, possibly because he's been in a relationship which could have affected his security levels, his security breaches. What I'm trying to say, whether the Ministry of Defence would say it's appropriate for him to carry on. So it's just beginning now to look a little bit more serious.
Sort of shades of Profumo about this, Andrew, isn't there?
Yes, there is. And I think, and we know what happened to the Profumo scandal. It eventually brought down the Macmillan government in the 60s because it was just one scandal after another. This is the sort of iceberg that a weak Prime Minister cannot afford. If she'd won that election with a large majority, she could be more relaxed. If she'd stayed without an election, she could be more relaxed because she had an overall majority, but she has no majority. And now she's looking considerably weaker because she's lost a very senior member of the government, very respected. He was, of course, known as a safe pair of hands. That's until we found out he put his hands on Julia Hartley-Brewer's knees.
Yeah, well, that's very true. And this morning's conversation across the radio was being dominated by the Prime Minister's deputy.
Indeed. Now, I've been writing about that today. I suspect, as often happens with these things, my stuff might end up on the spike because it'll be overtaken by this. But this is an extraordinary conversation where a young woman who was a friend of Damien Green's family claims that fleetingly, having a drink with him in a bar in Waterloo, he touched her knee. She wasn't even sure if he did touch her knee, but she thinks he did touch her knee. And this has now put him in the centre of a major Cabinet Office inquiry. And to me, that smacks of utter trivia and utter overreaction. Damien Green, of course, is consulting lawyers because he can't bear the inference that he was behaving sexually inappropriately. And I have to say, Nigel, having worked at Westminster for 20, 30 years, I've had my knee touched so many times by MPs of both sexes. I've never complained.
No, well, we've all got different standards, Andrew, and what we think's acceptable and what we think's not. But so the Damien Green thing, as you say, I listened to all this morning.
That's going nowhere.
And I thought it sounded very trivial.
Going nowhere.
But then I have to say, the day before, I saw all the stuff about Sir Michael Fallon and thought that was trivial. I've been proved to be completely wrong about that.
Well, I'm just maintaining that you're right. To be your instinct. He is not leaving the government as Defence Secretary because of a minor incident which Julia Hartley-Brewer said didn't matter 15 years ago. There's something else coming, whether we get it tonight, but my instincts are it's coming soon. And my instincts are it involves some form of relationship that the Ministry of Defence say would not have gotten through positive security vetting. And he has said in that statement his conduct has fallen below what people would expect of someone who's leading the armed forces, which makes me think it's something much bigger, and no doubt we'll discover in the next few hours or day or two.
Yeah.
I was meant to go to the Spectator dinner tonight, the Parliamentarian of the Year Award. I don't think I'm going to get there.
No, you're going to be rather too busy, aren't you? And finally, Andrew, amidst all of this, are there swirling around the corridors allegations of a much more serious nature?
I don't sense it. I had lunch in the House of Lords today. It was a brief lunch because there was so much happening, and there was a sense of frustration amongst peers and MPs I spoke to. Bumped into Nigel Lawson, all sorts of those sort of people who just think the dossier, the sex dossier, overreaction, and that the newspapers had lost a sense of perspective until, of course, we heard about the rape allegation, and now, of course, whatever's coming with Sir Michael Fallon. But there's a sense that actually there's a slight sense of parallel universe going on here. Do people in the country really worry too much about MPs might put a hand on somebody's knee, or they might?
They couldn't care less. They couldn't care less, but they would care. They would care about abuse of position. They would care about assault. Andrew Pearce, thank you very much indeed. You can listen to Andrew here on Friday night at 7 o'clock. He's great to listen to. For those that wanted to talk about Trump, what happened yesterday, I apologise, but this really is a very big piece of breaking news. The fact that the Defence Secretary, Sir Michael Fallon, has resigned following allegations of past behaviour. Clearly, it is not just that he touched Julia Hartley-Brewer's knee. We will find out more. You've been listening to The Nigel Farage Show.